Thank you, everybody, for joining us with Eugene King for Radical Self-Care during COVID-19. Eugene is the coordinator for the Alcohol and Other Drug Initiatives at the Health Promotion and Advocacy Center. She provides alcohol and drug intervention and programming that is trauma-sensitive and student-focused. Eugene blends her academic and professional background in sociolinguistics, violence prevention, and social justice work to create spaces for radical self-care and truth-telling. And that sounds, and she's also the chair of the Strategic Communications Committee for Staff Council, and her constituency is the Office of Campus Life. She's a fabulous human being, and everybody else thinks so because she is a staff award recipient for inclusive excellence. So we welcome Eugene as our presenter this afternoon, and I wanted to give a quick shout out to take a look at the Staff Council website, which I put a link for. We have elections coming up. We would love for you to join us, learn more about us, participate in Staff Council. And we have a sip and paint this afternoon, so you can bring your coffee and your paintbrush and join us for steam relaxation at 3 o'clock. And we hope you're enjoying Staff Appreciation Week and all of the work that's gone into StaffCon today that has been organized by Amber McClay, Andrew Alcadi, Chandani Ramwani, Chelsea Anderson, Daniel DeHollander, and Jennifer Tether. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yay, thank you so much, Ophira. So we're going to talk about radical self-care during COVID-19, and we're going to try to do it in 45 minutes, maybe 40 minutes now. So let's get started. And I love to get started just with a bit of a grounding. So whether your camera's on or off is up to you, but let's just start by maybe trying to drop our shoulders and clenching your jaw. If you'd like, you can close your eyes while doing this, and I'll read it out loud for you. Softening your forehead and your eyes. We hold a lot of tension in between our eyebrows. While you're doing this, being mindful of your breath. See if you're holding your breath in any way. Allowing it to flow, maybe flattening your hands. Our fingers are curved a lot of the time now, more than ever, with our keyboards. Being mindful of your breath. Breathing in and out. Seeing if you can lengthen your inhale. Maybe your belly will expand, and then exhaling, belly button to spine. You'll do a couple more breaths just like this. Very nice. So whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and blink open your eyes if they were closed and come back into our space. All right. So just to let everyone know today, we will be talking about radical self-care, and some of the things that will be coming up will be topics like mental health, of course, our current pandemic, some brief talk and explanation of trauma, secondary trauma, and racial trauma. And so let's practice what we preach, right? So while we're learning, feel free to also honor your own needs. The session will be recorded, so you can look at this at another time. I'll be sending you my slides. You'll have all the resources. If you need to turn your camera off, you want to let me know something in private, you can. I really encourage you to do that. Okay. All right, so Ophira already gave me a great introduction. So this is just me, Eugene. I use she, hers pronouns. Just a little bit about my background is that in addition to wellness, I just bring some experience as a certified yoga teacher. So just in some body practices, as well as mind-body medicine fundamentals, which some of the things I'm talking about, I'll incorporate in my presentation. Okay, and if you ever want to talk about any of these things, I'm totally game. I love talking about it. So what we're going to try to talk about in a compressed time is talking about what is self-care, how self-care looks like and how it's impacted during a specific situation like ours right now during COVID. We're going to talk a little bit about your inner child. Stay curious here, and then some tangible techniques and offerings that I'd like to give you as we wrap up. Okay. So this is from Nayyirah Waheed. She's one of my favorite poets. She wrote Salt, and this is one of my favorite poems that I think really encapsulates self-care work, is that the first relationship you have and the one that you start and end with is really with yourself. The first, what is self-care? Roots and basics. So always going back into the roots of self-care, radical self-care especially, is in Black feminist work and the work of so many others. And so I specifically quote here Audre Lorde. She is a feminist writer, activist, extraordinaire, and the specific quote is really popular in self-care work. And if you can't see it, it says, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political welfare." So like many other Black feminist scholars and activists, she talks about thank you. She talks about how self-care is not just to sustain myself, it's also a way to radically exist in a society where often specific identities and experiences are marginalized and often not welcome. So let's first talk about what self-care is not. Self-care is not solely focused on purchasing and buying material goods. So self-care is definitely a really hot topic lately. You might see it in some of your favorite stores and articles, apps in the App Store. So it's really important to know when we're talking about radical self-care, some of the things just to be aware of. Self-care is not only about feeling positive emotions all the time. It's not actually just about relaxation. A lot of times we might see self-care images being associated with face masks, cucumbers on the eyes, a spa, bubble bath. And while those things might be a part of your self-care, and there's nothing wrong with that, the core of self-care is checking in with your needs, your opportunities for growth, which can cause a lot of discomfort. And it can cause also sometimes some pain. So that might mean working on our boundaries, maybe considering medication, going to therapy, changing our therapist, having a hard conversation. Self-care is also not exclusive and a privilege for the select few folks. I really see this is being tied with like being material goods. It's not just paying for expensive vacations or things to purchase. And it's also not indulgent or a waste of time. We'll get more into this later. So I really like this comic because it really captured for me some of these thoughts that I had about self-care too, where we're getting all these messages, and especially now, as we've been in quarantine for a few months, maybe you've noticed your ads have gotten a little different. Maybe there's more like gym, kind of like fitness programs or things dedicated to like helping you quote unquote like lose weight or not gain weight. We'll go into that a little bit in terms of what's real self-care and what's fake self-care. So what is radical self-care? It's a big question, but here's some of the tenets of it. It incorporates your whole being, your mind, your body, your spirit, and also your community. So community is important because self-care is not just about myself. The core of it is that, yes, I do need to show up for myself before I can show up for other people, whether that's your fellow staff, your students, your family. It considers intergenerational and structural factors that might either help support you in your self-care practice or challenge the ways that you can take care of yourself. It's inclusive for all folks, able-bodied, of all genders, of all socioeconomic statuses, and it's beyond productivity. So radical self-care isn't just about, well, let me take care of myself just enough so that I can get back to work and be productive again. The idea is that actually you are worthy always, and productivity is not always the factor in terms of why we're practicing self-care. So what's in your cup? This is just a visual exercise. I've had students literally draw a cup and write in what fills their cup. So here are some examples of what might fill your cup. spending time with people you love, being in nature, having a new experience that makes you feel excited, getting your work done ahead of time, cooking and eating yummy food that makes you feel good, limiting your screen time and social media. So these are things that help fill your cup. Some things that may drain your cup or overflow your cup would be things like emotional labor, not being able to show up fully in your life, in your relationships, at work. Endless scrolling on social media, guilty, especially now. Overcommitting or poor boundaries, not being able to say no when you really need to say no. Burnout, experiencing microaggressions. These are just a few. And so briefly, we'll talk about the types of self-care. So a lot of the times we might think about physical self-care. So we know a lot and are taught a lot about, maybe things around nutrition, basic nutrition and exercise. But so much of the time we lose so many other aspects of our full selves when we don't talk about emotional self-care. Maybe things like finding time to cry and express your emotions, finding a hobby, practicing forgiveness. Psychological self-care, which might mean learning to ask for help. Maybe you join a support group, just doing anything related to self-awareness or self-growth. Relationship self-care. So this isn't just focused on romantic relationships, knowing that all of the relationships in our lives, friendships, family, chosen family, are equally important in our lives. And spiritual self-care. So spiritual self-care doesn't always equal religion, right? So it can be any type of deep self-reflection, thinking about our place in the world, meditation. It can be prayer, volunteering for a cause. So all of these aspects of self-care are equally important as physical self-care. So getting to this chart about real self-care versus fake self-care. So I love this chart. I follow a lot of therapists on Instagram. I think they have awesome content and I always learn a lot. Sometimes it makes me uncomfortable. I'm like, oh, that post was definitely geared to me. So, as you kind of look at this list pretty briefly, there are so many things that I've seen or maybe even I've fallen into that is actually fake self-care. So thinking about talking poorly to yourself to quote unquote motivate you, saying yes to everyone because you want to be a nice person, socializing because of FOMO, being on social media because of FOMO, fear of missing out in case folks don't know, working out as a punishment or attending any kind of class or webinar that is focused on shaming your eating habits or your appearance. So anything that is profiting off of you and your self-hatred or any form of you not being enough is fake self-care in a nutshell. Real self-care is about, of course, being in touch with your individual needs, your unique needs, setting boundaries, spending time with people who enrich your life and inspire you to be better, moving your body because you can, because you want to. So these are things just to think about. And when we think about specifically fake self-care, asking yourself who benefits from this thought, who benefits from this kind of marketing. And if it's not you, probably fake self-care. So barriers to practicing self-care. If you would like, I would love to know some of it could be a word. What kind of gets in the way when you're like, yeah, this all sounds nice and everything, but blank, this makes it tough sometimes. So go ahead and let me know in the chat. I have a couple ideas, of course. Ooh. Guilt, yep, thinking you have no time. Low energy, yes. Yep, responsibilities. My slide definitely got ahead of me. Mm-hmm. Yes, maybe the pressure of well, if I don't do this now, I'm just going to forget to do it later. So just do it now. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Our pandemic. So I'm hearing, thinking about family responsibilities, what's happening right now with protests, maybe our sense of like safety, feeling overwhelmed in general. So thank you to everyone who participated, and feel free to keep adding. These are some of the things, you know, you've already captured and that I thought of as well in terms of like what I hear as being barriers to self-care. So time, resources, caregiving responsibilities, whatever that looks like for your family or within your friend group. A big one is feeling like we are worthy of self-care, right? So just the thought like, oh, do I even deserve to do this? Like, how dare I take time for myself when blank, when I need to help someone else, when whatever the thought is. So that's actually a huge, huge barrier that I hear a lot. And I have, you know, systemic and structural barriers with an asterisk, because guess what? To be effective, radical self-care has to be institutionalized. It needs to be institutionalized in our policies and our culture. So it's not enough for me or anyone else to say, well, just take care of yourself, when folks need community, and we also need accountability and commitment, right, from the institutions and places that we're in that say, yeah, this is important actually, and here's how we can do that for you, with you. So I put this here in a big red box also to kind of help hopefully alleviate some maybe feelings of personal guilt you might have of like, well, I should be doing better. You know, I know that this would make me feel good, but I don't make time for it. You know, it's tough when, for example, you're used to having time for self-care and all the daycares are closed, or you're only in one space the whole time, right? So these are structural factors we need to take into account. Great. So coping during COVID, right? We've been in here for a few months, and like, I should have prefaced this presentation to say I'm not the only expert about self-care, about COVID even. And so I really also welcome you to share your tips, your thoughts, any comments you have in our chat too. You know, our community has a lot to offer. Great. So in the very beginning of COVID-19, I'm a pretty visual thinker and processor. I created this chart because I was learning about the stages of grief, and I saw a lot of the stages of grief showing up in the ways that people were reacting to the pandemic, right? And so I just wanted to offer this as a tool, maybe for reflection for yourself in ways that maybe you might experience what's going on right now. And what's going on right now can mean a lot of different things. Beyond COVID right now, there's so much happening in our world. And, you know, there was a comment, I think Ophira just mentioned with protests and Black Lives Matter, that it's so important for me to say, you know, while we're talking about self-care right now, it's also so important to consider how world events and like our personal lives affect the way that we can do this stuff and talk about these things. So please keep that in the context. And so these are just some ways that, for example, stages of grief being denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. This is a very simplistic model of it, and it's not linear, can show up in our lives. And so in line with that, these are some of the ways that people commonly react to stressful events. So searching for an explanation or a meaning, like, oh, maybe this had to happen because blank, blank, blank. Talking to others, sharing about their worries, excessively preparing or doing. Maybe you're like constantly cleaning, or you're just like thinking about like, okay, well, if this happens and this happens, and then I have to purchase things. I would say the people who like bought out all the toilet paper, this is one of the responses. So when we're thinking about the ways that people react to stressful events, I also think about, you know, the ways that people might respond in trauma. So often it's very common for people to either so hypoarousal, kind of underfunction, or overfunction. And this can change day by day. So overfunctioning would be things like what's in the dark blue, excessively preparing and doing, try to make up for it, and do kind of distract yourself and do other things, blaming it out and taking it out on others. And underfunctioning can look like it's really hard to get out of bed. It's hard to do things that I kind of enjoyed earlier. self-isolating, not talking to people, pretending that it isn't even happening, and avoiding it in every source of conversation, or not even looking at the news. So it's important to know just some ways that maybe we under or over function in times of stress and in the context of, a pandemic that we've never been through before. And so what makes this a challenging time right now, first of all, is that it's a novel or a weak situation. So, in organizational psychology, they talk about strong and weak situations. So a strong situation is where we have had a lot of experience. We're all pretty aware of some of the social norms, what we can expect from the situation. And the opposite is the weak situation, where we're like, what are the social norms around this? How do we act? What's going to happen? And that can create a lot of anxiety in line with being an uncertain circumstance, and that can have a lot of us feeling like anxious or maybe questioning our safety, emotional or physical. Screen fatigue, the political and racial climate of our country, I think that's been true for a while. I think especially this past week, maybe even actually this past month in May, it's been tough. And power dynamics can often be heightened virtually. So I was listening to this work podcast with Adam Grant, and I wanted to quote him here, where he talked about how, especially in like virtual Zoom meetings, he was noticing like people who don't have as much, power or status were being muted, or like not giving a lot of space to talk. This can also ring true between introverts and extroverts, even to the point where like some people don't even want to turn on their cameras, and that might be misinterpreted in a certain way. So this can all add to what makes this a challenging time. And all of the mishaps that can happen. With Zoom, I'm sure you all are very familiar now with some of the mishaps. I wanted to also give you a framing for what's going on and what you might be experiencing, right? So I wanted to lay out the difference between compassion fatigue, or often called secondary or vicarious trauma, and burnout. And these things can coincide and work together. So compassion fatigue is the emotional residue or strain of exposure to working with folks who are suffering a traumatic event. This can also be exposure in terms of like seeing, right? News, constantly seeing emails about the same thing that involves you. And so the thing about compassion fatigue is that there's a faster onset, and it often evokes a survival response. Like, am I going to be safe? Or sometimes we might feel vicarious trauma as if we are experiencing that ourselves, right? So when we talk about this in a racial trauma context, when, for example, Black staff and faculty are constantly having to be exposed to the news media coverage of like all these videos and news coverage and hashtags of other Black and brown bodies being killed, that can definitely evoke secondary trauma and questioning safety, as an example. And that is relevant to our work because we don't show up as just one thing in our jobs, right? We are so many things beyond your job title. So the difference between this and burnout is that burnout is not necessarily trauma related. It can be exacerbated by your secondary trauma or compassion fatigue. So burnout is a cumulative process. It happens a little bit more slowly, and it can be associated with increased workload, institutional stress, and so many different factors. So I hope that's a little bit clear about like the difference. And we also know from studying trauma that often our bodies experience our stress before our minds can even process it. So what are some of the signs of compassion fatigue? So many different things, right? It could be things related to your nervous system arousal, so sleep disturbances, insomnia, nightmares, not being able to stay asleep, emotional intensity, so maybe things that wouldn't necessarily anger you or make you cry or make you whatever, irritated perhaps, do in a shorter period of time. Thinking about isolation and feeling a loss of morale, maybe even a loss of self-worth. loss of hope and meaning, so AKA kind of like existential despair, anger towards perpetrators or anger towards a specific group of folks. Symptoms of burnout. How many of us have felt like SpongeBob before? I have. So the symptoms of burnout are really interesting. A really common one is pushing yourself to work harder. So kind of denying like that burnout is there and you're like, you know what? No, I'm just going to work harder. I got this. It's going to be okay. I'm not even going to ask for help. Just really like kind of pushing your limit. So neglecting your personal care needs, displacement of conflict, AKA when you take it out on others. Changes in your values to validate your self-worth. So what that means is like, maybe you're someone who did value, you know, wellness and like having a balanced life. And during burnout, as you're trying to kind of like push through, you're like, no, like I'm going to just cancel all my social plans. I'm not really going to eat. Like, it's okay. This is what's most important right now. Behavior changes, denial of your problems, social withdrawal, confusion of your identity. So there might be some overlap in terms of the symptoms, but a lot of times burnout also has pretty common stages that people go through, whereas compassion fatigue, it can show up in really different ways for people. So, hope you could take a deep breath. That was a lot of heavy content. And we'll go into a little bit of some of the tools. So it's like, oh, wow, yeah, that's a lot. Like, I want to shut this down right now and go take a nap. Like, stay with me just a little bit if you can. So wanted to offer one of the tools for reflection is thinking about a comfort, stretch, and panic zone. I'm sure many of us have seen something like this before. And this is a tool I get from Yes World, from Jams. And let's just go right into it. Comfort zone, as you might expect, comfort zone is where you feel comfortable. You're not really thinking about anything. Might be looking at a meme, just eating, living your life, you're having a good time. Stretch zone is where you're like, all right, this is interesting. Like, I'm not sure, but you're still learning. You're still present, but you might be a little bit uncomfortable. So this might be meeting someone for the first time, trying something new, you know, getting the courage to kind of like talk about a certain thing that you haven't before. Your panic zone, your red zone, is the zone where you are not able to engage. So you're not able to learn. You're kind of in survival mode and panic. So the important thing to know is that all of us have these zones, and kind of what puts us in each zone is different, right? What might be comfortable for me might be a stretch zone for Renee. And what's like a panic zone for me might be great for Olivia. So knowing that they're all different and that we can kind of switch into zones in a matter of seconds, sometimes minutes, right? We might be comfortable and then something is said or a noise can happen and we're like, uh-oh, and we're in a stretch or a panic zone. So thinking about panic zones, offering a tool called the compass of reactions. So when we're in a panic zone, a lot of us tend to go into one of four reactions: attack self, attack other, avoidance, and withdrawal. So let's go into the differences between all of these. Attack others, so when we blame someone else, fight. The most extreme form of attack other is, of course, forms of violence, war, attacking ourself. So I'm not good enough, I always make mistakes, I'm so dumb, why did I say that? So any form of self-harm, emotional or physical, is attacking self. Withdrawal, this is when a person retreats into themselves, shutting down or freezing, isolating, you're not emotionally there. So a lot of times you might talk about it as dissociation, when we're physically here, but we're emotionally kind of checked out somewhere else. Avoidance, this tends to be a more active form where we're distracting ourselves with other things: social media, food, exercise, complaining. So these are some of the most common reactions to some of our panic zones. And why this is important is just thinking about, maybe for yourself, you might draw the kind of bullseye figure and think about, well, what helps me be in each of those zones. How do I know that I'm in my panic zone? Do I tend to go to these reactions? Are there certain reactions I go to more than others? And this can help you understand a little bit more, once you have the insight, knowing, okay, well, what do I do with that afterwards? So situations that might bring up our panic zones are the current pandemic, being, am I going to be safe? Are my loved ones safe? If I go out and I see someone who's not masked up, is that safe? Constantly aware of physical safety in terms of resources. Is this job going to be here in a month? Am I going to be okay? Can I do this? Can I do that? And so that can bring us in a heightened state, and sometimes in our panic zones, where maybe we're lashing out, we're going within one of the four reactions. Hearing racist or discriminatory comments, seeing things that we don't agree with, that can feel triggering, being called out in any kind of way. And honestly, while we're already kind of in a heightened state of awareness right now during our pandemic, any form of unplanned change could feel very challenging for us, because we're already it feels like we're not on a stable surface many of the times. It might feel like things are constantly moving. So for one more thing to change could feel like, oh my gosh, overwhelming. And that includes, maybe we might take things more personally. Like if people, someone says they're going to call me and they don't, I might take it more personally and go into a panic zone. So coping. I like to, divide coping in terms of maladaptive and adaptive versus good and bad, because what might be good coping for me might not be good for you. So we like to think about it in terms of what feels unhealthy and what feels healthy for you. So some examples of unhealthy or maladaptive coping tend to be things like substances in excess, that shouldn't just say eating, should say eating foods that don't make us feel good, any form of kind of codependent behaviors, and avoidance behaviors like we've gone over before. So some healthy or adaptive behaviors might look like setting an allotted time for some of the avoidance behaviors, or literally setting a time in your calendar, like this is my worry hour. This hour I get to just feel whatever I feel. I'm going to write it down, and after that I'm going to try to keep a cap on it until the next time. Healthy boundaries with yourself and others, especially now, it can feel really tough to maintain our boundaries, maybe like in our physical space as we're sharing it with so many people for some of us, for our work, where we're not having as many breaks or chance meetings of seeing coworkers, so it's easy to just stay at your screen for 8 to 10 hours just straight. Thinking about ways to break up your time, and we'll talk a bit about that. And also practicing radical acceptance. Radical acceptance is not saying, I love this situation, I love being here, this is great and awesome. It's, because I wouldn't say that. Radical acceptance is about just saying, you know what, yeah, this is what it is right now. It's about trusting that you've gone through tough things before, you will get through tough things in the future, knowing that impermanence is truly the constant in our lives. So knowing that this too shall pass in certain ways, whatever the this is for you. And radical acceptance is a critical tool, especially for mindfulness, which we'll go into, in terms of knowing yes, this is what it is, and it doesn't, and I don't have to do anything about it besides say, this is what it is. So connecting to your inner child. Why I bring this up, I like this quote, adults are just outdated children. And I bring up inner child work as a tool for self-care because a lot of times, first of all, it can be a tool for bringing self-compassion into our practice. So thinking about the ways that you talk to yourself, would you ever talk like that to a child in front of you? Some of the things that we say to ourselves in our minds when we're being critical are some of the harshest things that we wouldn't even say to people we don't like. And so a meditation or a visualization practice can be, you could even find a picture of yourself as a child and look at it and say, okay, what would I say if I saw me as a child right now? Would I speak in this way? thinking also about the ways that maybe we expect certain needs or duties to be fulfilled by people outside of ourselves can be inner child work. Also connecting to what brought you joy when you were younger? What did you like to do? What I really like about kids is a lot of them just don't have rules about things. Adults, we love to make up rules. We just love to make up rules and structure, where kids are like, why? Why can't we have, ice cream and spaghetti together? Like, that doesn't sound good for me right now, but they truly don't understand, like, why. And sometimes that kind of curiosity and thinking back to what brought you joy when you were younger can be helpful in connecting with things beyond our job titles and our duties and responsibilities that can weigh us down. And also, when we think about sometimes the self-guilt that we have around taking care of ourselves, we can think about also, like when I was a child or growing up, was I encouraged always to be a helper? Maybe sometimes even sacrificing my own needs to be a helper, and that's what was praised in me. I wonder in what ways that might impact me now as an adult. And this is just a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh. I won't read it to you. We have a few minutes, but kind of explaining also sometimes like thinking about in what ways we might still harbor things from our childhood that show up currently. So ways to connect to your inner child in self-care work. Write a letter to younger you, maybe at an age where you feel like you really needed it. Go back and look at photos of yourself as a child. Extra points if you had really, really cool fashion. I used to wear like a pirate costume with my Tweety Bird pajamas like every night. Speak to yourself like you would to a child or to just someone you love. Observe your self-talk. Allow time for rest. Allow time for play. Do something new and don't judge yourself if you do it badly. Even better if you do it badly the first time. And go outside and pretend you've never been outside before. Sounds weird, but maybe you'll kind of, learn something that you didn't practice before. And also knowing what we don't heal in ourselves or like have compassion for ourselves, we might pass on. Okay, techniques and offerings while you're here, right? So quick tips. Incorporating a self-care plan that integrates all aspects of self-care like we've discussed. Creating routines and shifts throughout your week, maybe even your day. That can look like having a visual habit tracker where you keep even like what might feel mundane, like drink water, floss, like, I don't know, like go outside for 5 minutes. A lot of people enjoy visual habit trackers. Maybe you might use markers, for example, so that they can keep track of their progress. Shifting like what you wear throughout the day. So if you're in the same outfit all day, every day, like I've done that, but maybe it can help to shift out of your outfit just so, psychologically you're like, all right, it's a different part of my day. Keeping a physical or electronic calendar and writing one thing you enjoyed doing that day, and you can look back and see, okay, not every day was exactly the same. Time feels really weird right now, right? Oh, so step 1, assess where you are now in terms of your self-care. I'll give you all these slides, but I just happen to use this assessment that I like a lot. And then choose what works for you. For some people, they like having a daily checklist. Maybe it's a weekly checklist. Maybe it looks kind of like this chart here where you draw and you like write down some of the things that you'd like to try. But I do really encourage a form of writing. Oh, what's happening? Oops. Can you still see me? Okay. Okay. Care plan. So a self-care plan will look different for everyone. For yourself, it could look like daily checklist, habit tracker, a spreadsheet that you keep that says like, here's some of my warning signs for when I'm not doing so hot, and here's some things that I know have helped me. Here's when I'm in the red. Here's some of the things like, okay, just take a shower, try to have 3 meals, drink some water, wear comfy clothes. Maybe that's your self-care for when you're in the red. With your family or people you live with, it could look like a self-care chart. You share it with each other. and talk about, hey, here's when I'm in the orange or red zone. Like, this is what you can do to help me. Or like, can you help check in with me when you know that you notice that I haven't eaten a meal, all day. Could you just like send me a reminder, etc. With friends, with coworkers, scheduling time, having honest conversations about self-care. A lot of the times people, they want to help, but don't know how. And the thing is, if we don't tell people how they can help us, they won't either do it in the way that we need, or they might not even know how to reach out, right? So a lot of this is being able to be very direct about our needs, which for many of us can feel very challenging, kind of a stretchy thing. And to also note that that requires us to be a little bit insightful about, well, what do I need? What do I enjoy, right? And so making space to know, well, what do you like? What kinds of sources of support? Are you someone who really likes acts of service and someone can do something for you tangibly? Do you like just having someone as a listening ear? Knowing these things help you communicate your needs. So you don't have to read all of this right now. I just wanted to let you know that I'm giving you a chart of like 3 kind of easy tools. A lot of them are free for you to try. So we have mindfulness practices such as breath work, journaling, art prompts, affirmations. We have physical practices. A lot of these are accessible for free as well. Mindfulness-based physical practices such as yoga or qigong. Aromatherapy. So if you already have like a lotion you really love the smell of, or you maybe have like a lavender oil you don't know how to use, here are some ways you could use it. Stretching and just like knowing how to kind of like self-massage is also a great tool, as we're doing a lot of this lately. Yes, me too. And so wrapping up, radical self-care, it's a practice of getting in touch with our needs and our areas of growth and healing so that we can be present for other people's needs, areas of growth and healing, etc. It is in harmony with and required for community care. It considers and works to dismantle systemic barriers and oppression. It's a lifelong practice. It's not just something you do once and it's like, okay, great, I did self-care, right? So like in conclusion, the more you know. And thank you. I'm wildly surprised I was able to get through all that. I think I talked a long time. And this is me in kindergarten.
Thank you so much, Eugen. And I invite everybody to start their self-care at 3 o'clock with Sip and Paint. Grab a hot or cold beverage of your choice, bring a pencil or paintbrush, and just get into your zen and do some artwork and get out of your work mind.
Awesome.
And I've attached a survey, so if everybody could give us some feedback on how you're enjoying StaffCon, we'd greatly appreciate it. Please check out our Staff Council website so you can learn more about what we do, how we advocate for staff, our peers, our colleagues, because we care about you. And we have election coming up. We'd love for you to join and participate in Staff Council. And you can always attend a meeting. There's lots of good stuff in links.
Yes, thank you so much. And I'll send the slides, and they will also have resources for folks to look through. A lot of them. And even videos if you like to learn visually. All right. Thank you, everyone.
And you have Friday off, so enjoy that day of self-care too.
All right. Bye.